Hi, and welcome back to the Enchanted Self Returning. We are here today with a very, very special guest who's going to tell us about her book, and I'm sure even more about why she wrote it and all sorts of things. This book is something that struck me as one of those tear jerkers to get ready for. It's just so deep and it's so meaningful. It's so arousing about the depths of human beings, both on the good side and on the not so good side. I'm not exactly sure what the correct title is. So if you could announce yourself and also say your title so everyone gets it clearly.
Okay. Hi, I'm Gwen Strauss, and I'm the author of, I think that I'm the author of The Nine, um,
Okay.
the story of eight women and their escape from a camp in
Yes.
Nazi Germany.
Yes. Well, that is, it's almost the type of um, title that you don't know where to go. I mean, I know that this is going to be a very deep story,
Mm,
but I also know that people need a way to hang on to it that
mhm,
makes sense to them and gives them hope. And
mhm.
I know that you were able to achieve that in the way you wrote the book. So,
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
I also, I'm sorry, don't mean to interrupt. Sorry.
No, go ahead because I think you're going to circle around what I'm saying.
Yeah. So the Nine is a book that I wrote because it involves my great aunt. So it's a personal story in a way. She told me the story, and I got involved in that. And I have a much more recent book that was released a month ago called Milena and Margaret, which is also takes somewhat of the same subject matter and is a love story in Ravensbrück. So both of those books are kind of related to the same thing, and I think they're both related to this idea of female resistance and female solidarity through some of the worst times, and how love and friendship can really conquer and come through even in the darkest times of humanity.
Yes. And of course, in terms of men, it sort of can be a dark side around men. And it's something that probably is hard to really uh, handle because over the centuries, probably since men left their caves, um, they have been more in charge of what we would call war games than women.
Mhm,
So they often are more the culprits.
mhm,
So, but let's stick to the women in this case because they're the survivors and the people that had the courage to do all the things they ended up doing. So
mhm.
tell us a little bit about your story and their
Okay,
story, I
that's
should.
right, the Nine. So the Nine is called that because it is nine women. About well, now quite a while ago, my great aunt, before she passed away, she told me this is just started to tell me about her work in the resistance. She was French during obviously during the war, and then how she was arrested by the Gestapo, tortured, and then deported. And then she told me this, and also how she did this sabotage when she was working in the forced labor camp, and then about her escape and this escape with a group of women. And I was sort of gobsmacked by this. I had never heard the story, wasn't spoken about in the family. My great aunt was married to a war hero, Danny Benedit, who was really well known as being an important hero in the war and the resistance. And that was what everyone talked about when we spoke about the war, or when we spoke about heroism or the resistance or anything like that. So there was this whole other side that I had never heard. So I wanted to find the story more. I came back to my great aunt and asked her if I could record it, which we did. I made
Oh,
a transcript, and then I had small children. I had a life. I had a job. I didn't get back to the story, though. I did. I was really interested in it and kept thinking about it. Um, but it took a couple of events to really trigger me really wanting to find out more. And around 2016, I decided to to try to retrace the route of the escape that she had taken. And I wanted to do a trip with my daughter, who at the time was almost the exact same age that Hélène had been. Hélène was my great aunt, Hélène Podliaski. And my
How old
daughter
is your daughter when you say that?
was 23. These were
Okay.
very young women. They were all between the ages of
Uh,
20 and 29, all nine of them. And so I decided with my daughter to go and try to retrace the route of their escape, and I was going to write a simple essay or an article about that. But in doing so, we went to a concentration camp. We went to Buchenwald. I had never been to a camp before, and I had never really spent time in Germany before, even though my daughter and I are German because my grandfather was a German Jew. He escaped, and we were able to get our German nationality, in much later, and that's allowed me to live and work in France, and my children have grown up in France. But we had never really explored that German side. So we went to do this. We went to Berlin, and then we tried to trace their steps. But the visiting of the camp was so powerful, and I think so moving. I realized that I didn't really know what I was writing about, that I had to learn a lot more before I could write anything. And one of the things I needed to learn was who were the other women. My great aunt didn't remember their names. She didn't really give that much information. There were a lot of holes in her story. And so that became a kind of a detective job for me to find out who were these other women and what were their stories. And so that was several years of research, and incredible work in the archives, wonderful archivists, that's what I wanted to say, great librarians, great help. And I was able to identify all nine women and I met 8 of the 9 families. All of the women had passed away by the time I was finally deeply researching it. But I did discover this tight-knit group of friends who had maintained friendships late and after the war. And I did discover other women in the group who had written accounts of what they had done and what they'd gone through together. And it was just to me, it was an amazing story because they were able to survive. They all survived.
Can you, at this point, I'm not even going to really look at my 5 questions because I think you're in a flow. Can you go on and give 1 or 2 stories to make a couple of the women real to
Mhm.
the audience?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, my tante, Hélène Podliaski, she was incredibly beautiful. She was a 23-year-old engineer and mathematician. She spoke so many languages fluently. She spoke Russian, Polish, German, English, French. Yeah, I think that's it, fluently. And she was brilliant. She was really smart. And she was in the resistance. She worked with the BOE. She found places for airplanes from England to land at night and organized resistance groups to greet them and to get the materials. She was actually there was a very important person in the resistance, one of the big heads, who was coming back into France and very much wanted by the Gestapo. And she was the one they sent. He came when he landed by parachute. She was the one that they had assigned to pick him up and take care of him.
Oh,
She
wow.
didn't know that until he arrived. But I found out since publishing the book from other people that she had done a lot more in the resistance that was even in her military record or that was declared. She was in charge of vetting potential resistance members, men, all around France. So she would go. They would send her secretly as a spy, basically, to meet these men and find out whether they could be trusted. And she would decide whether they could join or not based on how they behaved with her. Whether they talked too much, whether they, she was pretty high up in the program, in charge of the whole Normandy region, which is the very important region because, of course, that's where D-Day happened. So when she was finally caught, they knew that she was important, and they knew a lot of who she was, and so she was badly tortured. But because of her way, the German guard, the young German guard, fell in love with her and tried to help her and was able to would bring her things to eat. She told me it was really funny. At one point, he brought her a pound of butter, And she said it's really hard to figure out what to do with a pound of butter, like how to hide it, where you put it yourself. But then later he bought her sugar, and she said that was easier. I could just eat it. But she did a math equation on her prison wall, a very complicated equation that's never been solved in mathematics, just to keep her brain active. And eventually she was deported to Germany. And again in Germany, she continued even in the camp to be a resistance fighter and was able to sabotage weapons in this factory. So that's Hélène. She was sort of the leader of the group.
Now,
Um,
just to clarify, you had mentioned that you grew up Jewish, or you're technically Jewish. Was she also? Was she
She
Jewish?
was. Her father was, yeah, yeah, her father was Jewish. Her mother was Protestant. And she was, but the Germans didn't know that. She had kept that a secret. So there was another woman in the group of the nine that was also Jewish, Nicole, and she was, her parent, yeah, she was raised Jewish. Also, she had changed her name and was arrested under false ID, and the Germans didn't know that she was Jewish. So the group, and I don't know if the group even knew, because I think that was kept pretty secret, because
Mhm.
it would change the chances of survival for those
I
women.
guess the chances would have been even less if
Right,
they
exactly.
knew
If
that.
you were a political prisoner, you were a little bit better off than a Jewish prisoner by far, by sure. That's very, very true.
So go on and tell us about one of the other
So
ladies.
let's see, one of the others. I mean, they're all really wonderful and have great stories. One of the ones that was really moving to me was Zinka. She was very short, but everyone said she was the bravest of the group. She came from a family that was friends with Charles de Gaulle, that were all in the resistance from the day one of the war. One of her siblings died in an early battle. Her brother and sister were also deported. Um, Her husband was also deported. She was married. The way she helped get downed airmen through Paris to escape over the mountains into Spain. So she provided a safe house and a transport service for these hidden soldiers. What the way she was caught. So her husband was first picked up and arrested and was sent to this Fresnes prison. And she found out she was pregnant while he was in prison. And so she thought if she went to the prison and told him this, it would give him courage to survive. What she didn't realize is that she was herself on a wanted list by the Gestapo. So when she showed up at Fresnes, they immediately arrested her. And they found out she was pregnant. They didn't deport women at that point who were pregnant because they considered the baby innocent. So they allowed her to stay in Fresnes prison until she gave birth to a baby girl whom she named France, and a very patriotic name. And then she was deported. She talked all the time about her daughter. She wanted to live in order to see her daughter. It was sort of her reason, and became a kind of a reason of the group, was to get back to France, both the country and the baby. There was a kind of and she was the only mother in the group. She was the only one of the women who'd had a child. And so since the beginning of my work on this project, I had wanted to find France. I figured France could still be alive since she was born in 1943.
Yes.
So it was this whole complicated detective work and crazy coincidences and like lovely doors opening when I thought there was no hope. And I found France. She lived only couple hours away from me here in France. And so I drove up again with my daughter to meet her. And I always cry when I think about this. When I saw her, she and I hugged. And I said, you can't believe how long I've been looking for you. And she said, well, imagine how it's been for me to find out about my mother these so many years later. So she and I sat down, we spent a day together. Now she had found her mother after the war. She'd been taken away by and finally given back to her family. But because her mother was so ill, she had always been raised by other people and had always thought of her mother as an abandonment. Like, her experience of her mother was that her mother left her. And when she tried to talk to her mother about it, her mother said, oh, it was just fun. Like, her mother downplayed it because she didn't want to upset her, but by downplaying it, she sort of said like, oh, it was just a lot of fun. And so France felt like my mother left me for a lot of fun. And then her mother died of tuberculosis, which she had contracted in prison. So her whole life, she said, was a sort of a psychological feeling of abandonment, and that was sort of a problem that she'd had struggled with, that everyone would leave her always. And so it was quite an incredible afternoon and day that we spent together crying and talking. And it gave her finally the courage after our meeting to go up into the attic of her home where she had boxes of her mother's papers that she had never looked at, and opened them up and found her mother's account of the escape, and also her mother's account about how much she wanted to be reunited with
Oh,
her daughter. So that was, for me, was an incredible,
and that
wonderful.
must have helped her, even though it was late. Yeah,
Yeah, it was really beautiful. It was really beautiful. Yeah.
yeah. So, yeah, what interests me as I watch you is you're very energized, and I guess, but I want to ask you, what did all this research and these books do for you or about you? You
Mhm.
know, I
Yeah, I
like,
mean, yeah, it's a good question. I mean, a lot of people ask me about, because it's heavy duty research, it's hard research, honestly, especially when you really get into the nitty gritty of the camps and what happened in the camps. I have to say that I've now done two books really dealing with women in the camps, and certainly mostly about Ravensbrück, the one concentration camp built only for women, or the only concentration camp built for women. And it's dark and difficult work in one way, but in another way, I find over and over again incredible stories, little nuggets of just and beautiful humanity in these stories. So it's like the light and the dark. I see both. You see both sides. There have been times when I've had to put down the work and walk away and go for a long walk in the woods and just clear my head because it's just too much. And there were things that I read that I wish I hadn't read, that I wish I didn't know.
oh,
But there was also just I think in the depths of darkness, some people behave with astonishing humanity, and that to me gave me a kind of hope.
yes. As a psychologist myself, I'm curious now as you look back to your parents or siblings, aunts, uncles, the world you were in, do you see yourself as someone somewhat destined for the work you're now doing?
So interesting. Um, yeah, I mean, I of course believe that I can't do anything else but write. And I do feel like this story was really a gift. Is sort of like a blessing, even though, yeah, that my aunt chose me and told me this story. I feel really honored. I also feel like this story taught me a lot about my family, because one of the big things I learned a lot writing this and researching this book. And one of the big things I learned about was transgenerational trauma, which I hadn't understood and hadn't ever really seen in a way that, but once I saw it, once I was interviewing all these families and was starting to learn this and learn how these traumas went through in kind of amazing symbolic ways, I understood my own family better. My father, my aunt, my grandfather, I could see, and my grandmother, I could see how everyone is affected by what's happened. Even the First World War had this direct effect on my grandfather, and that had an effect then on my father, and that had an effect then on me. And, you just see the kind of cycles, how this sort of, even in a loving family, there is this brokenness that gets transmitted. And there was one really beautiful moment. I was interviewing one of the survivors, a child of one of the survivors, and his mother had been had tuberculosis, also contracted in the camp, and he got tuberculosis in the 1960s, and she was anorexic, and he became anorexic. And
Mhm.
I said, why? And he said, because she was so worried about me. After the war, they told all the women, like, if you were in the camps, your bodies were depleted, so your children will be undernourished. So you have to be really careful that they eat enough. And there were these charts and stuff that she would be like,
Yes.
you have to eat, you have to. So he was constantly be told to eat, to eat, to eat. And so he couldn't eat. He stopped. And I was with him and his son is a chef. And his son said, I'm a chef because I need to feed my family. Like I'm trying to feed this whole family
Yes,
that was hungry for so long. It was really beautiful, like there was a kind of, I don't know, at that moment we both, all three of us
yes.
laughed, and it was really lovely. Yeah.
That's beautiful. I know for me growing up, I see that exactly what you're talking about. And for me, it became clear that I always had to work to have women come into their own. That's what
Hmm.
started the whole enchant itself, was
Hmm.
helping women find their talents and their future.
Hmm.
And that
Interesting.
was because I saw aunts and people and women in my family who couldn't get to where they should have been able to get to.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
And there's nothing I
Well,
can do about it there.
yeah, but actually, that's sort of also, I mean, in a way, that's a little bit of the sad part of my book, is that after the war, these women have these incredible experience of solidarity and a deep friendship in a way that like soldiers would have together going through
Mhm,
battle, and this incredible connection, and they've been in the resistance, and they've been, you know, running secret papers and doing jobs and doing all of this kind of stuff with so much agency, and then resisting torture and getting, surviving.
mhm,
And then they get back to life, to normal life, in quotes, back to the world after the war. And they're asked to be quiet, to shut up, to go back to the house, to be housewives. And it's very kind of sad because they were women. There was even Charles de Gaulle said after the war, let the men take the glory. They've been so badly humiliated. And the women, that the women should step back and let the men take the glory. So all of these women that were probably about 50% of the resistance were women because they could be, because they were available in a way that men weren't. Um, they were ignored. They were erased from the story.
mhm.
And that was very traumatic as well.
So they missed that. You feel that they suffered not
Yes,
being honored in more different ways, standard ways. Um, so I
absolutely.
suppose they never got things to hang around their neck and put on their clothing,
It
whatever.
was even, if you were a woman who survived Ravensbrück, it was even sort of shameful. It was assumed that if you survived, you must have been raped or you must have been a prostitute. So you were no longer pure. You were no longer marriageable. And I'm pretty sure that one of my 9 women pretended she'd never been there for that reason. It was not like I'm a survivor. It was like, oh, please don't talk about it. I don't want anyone to know that I was in one of those camps. And if they said that they were in the resistance, they were laughed off, like, oh, right, the resistance. They must have just been,
Oh,
prostitutes. Yeah,
that is so sad.
it is very sad.
They weren't able to get their real glory.
Right. And then, those intense connections that they had with those women, they had to sort of keep that secret too. It's so there was a lot of
Yeah.
unsaid things, So they didn't tell their stories. They didn't tell their stories to their children. Often they told the stories to their grandchildren.
Wow. So none of the women are alive at this point.
No, they've all passed away. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's very few survivors left alive at this point
Yes.
from the camps. I think there's only a handful from Ravensbrück now.
Well, we really gone through a lot. I'm glad you were able to tell a lot of your story.
Thank
But
you.
is there anything else important about your story that you would like to tell in the last few minutes?
Yes, my last thing that I always feel like I want to say is that to me that what was the most moving and what was the most clear is solidarity. That when these women got together, women lived longer than men in the camps, and not because the camps were easier, they were just as awful. They lived longer because they stuck together. They formed communities and units. In the male camp, it was each one for his own, and in the female camps, there were really these camp families. And there's so many wonderful stories of solidarity. And the one that
Mhm.
I always love to tell is it was called the Gamelle de Solidarité, the bowl of solidarity. And at night, they would sit around and they would had one empty bowl. and everyone who could would put a spoonful of their food in that bowl. Now they were already starving. They already had so little to eat. The food was ridiculously nothing, boiled water with a few potato peels and dirt in it. And they would give that bowl to whoever that day needed it. So maybe someone had gotten news about a husband or a child, or maybe someone had been beaten by the guards or whatever. And so even when they had nothing, they would give something. And one of the women who, not the women in my group, but another woman who was in the same bunker, said, "Charity is giving when you can give, but solidarity is giving when you have nothing to give." It's really beautiful.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for getting up in France to
Sure,
so we could do this talk.
no
And
problem. Thank
I
you.
want to just give a little information again about the title and where to find the book, this kind of thing.
Okay, so the book I'm talking about today is The Nine, and my name is Gwen Strauss, and you'll find it on Amazon or anywhere else in your local bookstore, hopefully. And my most recent book, if you're interested in this subject, that just came out is Milena and Margaret, which is a love story in Ravensbrück. It's another true story that I came upon as I was doing research for The Nine, and it's a beautiful story of love.
Wonderful. This was great. Thank you for being my guest.
Thank you, Barbara.
All the best to you and your travels at every level of travel.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye for
Wonderful.
now.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.